She stood there, drenched in the freezing rain, her coat barely shielding her from the cold, one hand clutching her belly as if holding on to the last piece of hope she had left. Pregnant. Alone. Betrayed. The man who had once whispered sweet promises of forever had vanished the moment he heard the news, leaving her with nothing but a shattered heart and a baby growing inside her. And as if fate enjoyed playing cruel tricks, her landlord had thrown her out just days later. No money, no home, no one to call for help. Now, as the city lights flickered around her, mocking her misery, she fought back tears. Was this really how her story would end? As a discarded woman, left to wander the streets with nothing but regret. She had begged, pleaded, even tried calling him one last time, but all she got was a cold, heartless message. Not my problem. Lose my number. Her stomach tightened, not just from hunger, but from the weight of betrayal. How could someone who once claimed to love her become a stranger overnight? Maybe love was just a fancy word people used until responsibility knocked on their door. She stumbled through the streets, her soaked shoes squelching against the pavement, exhaustion weighing her down. Every door she knocked on was shut. Every face she passed was indifferent. It was funny, really. Just a few months ago, she had been sitting in a fancy cafe, sipping overpriced lattes, dreaming about baby names with the man she thought she knew. And now? Now she was just another face in the crowd, invisible, forgotten, discarded like yesterday's news. Her vision blurred, the world spun, and then, darkness. She didn't feel the moment her body hit the pavement. Didn't notice the sleek black car that screeched to a halt just inches away from her. And she definitely didn't see the powerful figure step out, his sharp eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of the unconscious woman before him. But fate did. And fate had just set the stage for something neither of them could have ever predicted. Hunger gnawed at her insides like a cruel joke, a reminder that survival wasn't just about heartache. It was about finding the next meal, the next warm place to rest, the next sliver of hope in a world that didn't give a damn. Emma had always been independent, always believed she could handle anything life threw at her. But nothing had prepared her for this, pregnant, homeless, rejected by the man she had trusted with her future. She had tried everything. Job applications. Rejected the moment they noticed her belly. "We need someone with long-term commitment," they'd say, their eyes darting to the unmistakable curve beneath her coat. Oh, sure, because growing a human inside her meant she couldn't type an email or answer a phone. The pitying looks, the fake apologies. It was enough to make her want to scream. Shelters. Overcrowded. "Sorry, we're full. Try again tomorrow." But tomorrow wasn't promised, was it? And so she wandered. The city that once felt alive now loomed over her like a monster, its neon signs flashing empty promises. She passed couples laughing over dinner, families bundled up in their cozy homes, people complaining about the most trivial things, spilled coffee, slow Wi-Fi, their favorite influencer not posting today. If only they knew. If only they felt even an ounce of what she was going through. But life wasn't fair, was it? Her hands trembled as she counted the last few coins in her pocket, barely enough for a cheap sandwich. She walked into a dingy corner store, ignoring the clerk's suspicious glare, grabbed the cheapest thing she could find, and placed it on the counter. Her fingers fumbled for the coins. One fell, rolled away, stopped at someone's expensive leather shoe. She barely had the energy to look up, but when she did, something in her gut twisted. Because the man staring back at her, he didn't belong in a place like this. He wasn't some tired, overworked clerk or another impatient customer. Number he was power-wrapped in expensive fabric, dominance in the form of a man, sharp suit, watch worth more than everything she'd ever owned, and those eyes, calculating, unreadable, dangerous. And just like that, her world shifted. Because this was no ordinary man. And he wasn't just staring at her, he was assessing her, and Emma had no idea that her fate had just been sealed. The world around her was fading, lights blurring, voices turning into muffled echoes, her body sinking into exhaustion. She barely registered the warmth that surrounded her, the feeling of being lifted, carried, placed onto something soft and unfamiliar. The sharp scent of leather, the faint hum of an expensive engine, the undeniable presence of someone sitting close, watching her. Emma forced her heavy eyelids open, blinking against the dim glow of the car's interior. And then she saw him. The same man from the store. Only now he wasn't just some intimidating stranger with a sharp suit and unreadable eyes. Now he was the man who had scooped her off the cold pavement like she weighed nothing, placed her inside a car that probably cost more than an entire apartment complex, and was now watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Who are you?" Her voice came out weak, barely a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her like she was some puzzle he hadn't quite figured out yet. And then, his voice, smooth, deep, with an accent that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Khalid al-Mansour. The name carried weight, power, the kind of name you didn't just hear, you felt. She had no idea who he was, but something about him screamed that he wasn't just rich. He was the kind of rich that made rules instead of following them. The kind of man who could buy entire cities, yet for some reason, had chosen to pick up a nobody like her. Her fingers tightened over her stomach, a protective instinct kicking in. Why are you helping me?" He let out a slow, measured breath. "Because I don't ignore things that interest me." Interest? The word sent a strange heat through her chest. Men didn't just help women like her for no reason. There was always a catch, always a price. And the way he was looking at her, calm, controlled, but with something simmering beneath the surface, made her question exactly what she had just gotten herself into. She should have been scared. Should have said no. Should have demanded to be let out of the car. But she didn't, because for the first time in weeks, she wasn't cold. She wasn't starving. She wasn't just another forgotten girl on the streets. And even though she had no idea what this man wanted, a part of her already knew this was the moment everything changed. When Emma woke up, the first thing she noticed was the warmth. Not the bitter cold she had grown used to, not the dampness of a shelter or the roughness of a park bench, but warmth, softness, safety. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the golden glow of a massive crystal chandelier above her. The bed beneath her was ridiculously comfortable, the kind of luxury she had only ever seen in magazines. Silk sheets, velvet pillows, a room so large it could fit her entire old apartment inside it twice over. And then reality hit. Where was she? Her heart slammed against her ribs as she sat up, her breath quickening. This wasn't a shelter. This wasn't a hospital. And judging by the sheer size of the place, this wasn't anywhere a girl like her belonged. And then, him. Leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, dressed in a crisp white shirt that somehow looked both effortless and expensive. Khalid, watching her, amused, like he was waiting to see how long it would take her to realize exactly whose world she had woken up in. "You're awake." His voice was smooth, unreadable. Emma swallowed hard, gripping the blanket as if it could somehow shield her from whatever was happening. "Where am I?" "My home." He said it so casually, like that explained everything. She frowned. "Why?" He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because you needed help." A pause. Then, with a hint of something almost teasing, he added, "And because I make a habit of collecting things that intrigue me." Collect? Intrigue? She wasn't some lost kitten he had picked up off the street. Her pulse kicked up. "I don't need to be collected." A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "No? Then tell me, where exactly would you have gone last night if I hadn't stopped?" Her stomach twisted. He had a point, and they both knew it. But still, this man, this situation, felt too unreal, too dangerous. Men like him didn't do things for free. Emma straightened her shoulders, forcing her voice to stay steady. "If this is some kind of deal, some kind of arrangement, I'm not interested." His smirk deepened, as if she had just said something funny. "Oh, I don't recall offering anything. You assumed." Heat flushed through her. Damn him, he was enjoying this, wasn't he? Before she could fire back, he turned, walking toward the door. "You'll find everything you need here. Clothes, food, whatever you require. When you're ready, come downstairs. We have things to discuss." And just like that, he was gone. Emma exhaled, pressing a hand to her stomach, her heart still racing. What exactly had she just walked into? And more importantly, why did part of her want to find out? Emma had never felt this out of place in her entire life. The mansion, if she could even call it that, was something straight out of a royal fantasy. High ceilings, marble floors that reflected the light like a mirror, massive windows with a view of the city that made her feel like she was standing on top of the world. Everything around her screamed wealth, power, untouchable luxury. And yet, here she was, barefoot, dressed in silk pajamas that weren't even hers, slowly making her way down a grand staircase that probably cost more than her entire existence. And waiting at the bottom, him, Khalid Al-Mansour, a man who didn't just look like he owned the world, he actually might. He stood near the fireplace, his back to her, phone in hand, speaking in low, firm Arabic. His voice was controlled, powerful, the kind that made men listen and obey without question. The deep timbre of his words sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Not because she understood, but because she could feel it. The authority, the dominance, the danger. And then he turned. Those dark, unreadable eyes locked onto her, sweeping over her in one slow, deliberate glance. He wasn't just looking at her. He was assessing her. "Sleep well?" His voice was smooth, but there was a knowing edge to it. Emma swallowed, tightening her grip on the silk robe he had so generously provided. Better than the pavement. His lips twitched. Amusement? Approval? She couldn't tell. "Good. Sit." Sit? Like a dog? She almost scoffed, but something about the way he said it, the quiet command, the confidence that she would listen, made her legs move before she could stop herself. A servant appeared as if out of thin air, setting down a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. The scent alone was intoxicating, but she hesitated. She had learned the hard way that nothing in life came for free. Khalid leaned back in his chair, watching her. "Relax, Emma. I don't poison my guests." "That's comforting." She picked up the cup anyway, savoring the warmth against her fingers before taking a cautious sip. Silence stretched between them, heavy, charged. And then, his next words shattered every ounce of composure she had left. "You're going to work for me." She choked on her coffee. "I'm sorry, what?" Khalid remained perfectly calm, as if he had just told her the weather forecast. "You need stability. I need someone I can trust." Emma blinked. Trust? From a man she had just met? She let out a dry laugh. "And what exactly would I be doing for you?" His lips curled into something dangerously close to a smirk. "That depends on how well you follow instructions." Her breath hitched. There was something about the way he said it, the low, deliberate emphasis, the way his gaze never wavered from hers. She should have said no, should have pushed back, should have demanded more answers. But instead she found herself whispering the most dangerous word of all. "Okay." The rules were simple. At least that's what Khalid had told her. But Emma was starting to think that nothing about this man, or his world, was simple. Her job? Assistant. Whatever that meant. She had no real qualifications, no experience in the high-stakes world of business, and yet here she was, dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than her rent had ever been, stepping into an office that screamed power, surrounded by men who didn't even try to hide the way they stared at her. Some with curiosity, others with something darker. But none of them dared to say a word, because she was with him. Khalid walked ahead, every step controlled, every movement dripping with effortless dominance. And as they passed through the grand glass doors of his corporate empire, she realized something. She wasn't just working for him. She was stepping into a world she had no business being in. "Keep up, Emma." His voice was smooth, but the command in it was clear. She swallowed and quickened her pace, ignoring the stares, the whispers. They entered his office, a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. The kind of office that belonged to kings, not mere men. She barely had time to take it all in before he turned to her, his gaze sharp. "You start now." She frowned. "Doing what, exactly?" He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, watching her like she was some puzzle he was deciding whether or not to solve. Observing, learning. Then with an almost teasing glint in his eyes, "And making sure I don't fire half the people who annoy me today." Her lips parted. "Is that an actual possibility?" He smirked. "You'll find I have very little patience for incompetence." Well, that was reassuring. Before she could respond, the door swung open, and a sharply dressed man strode in, his energy all arrogance and entitlement. He barely spared her a glance before launching into a conversation with Khalid about numbers, stocks, investments, things Emma didn't understand in the slightest. But what she did understand... The moment the man made a passing comment about her presence, something casual, something dismissive, Khalid's entire demeanor shifted. Cold, sharp, lethal. Leave. The man blinked. What? Khalid didn't repeat himself. He didn't have to. The look alone sent the man scrambling for the door, muttering apologies under his breath. Emma exhaled slowly. That was intense. Khalid turned to her, unfazed. Get used to it. She should have been intimidated, should have questioned whether she really wanted to be here, but instead, she just stared at the man in front of her and realized something dangerous. She wasn't afraid of him. She was intrigued. Days blurred into nights as Emma navigated the strange world Khalid had pulled her into. She was no longer the scared, homeless girl who had stumbled into his car that night. No, now she was his assistant. A role that came with more responsibilities, more surprises, and, let's be honest, more danger than she could have ever imagined. There was power in the air. Everywhere she went, every room she entered, it was like a storm swirling around Khalid. His presence dominated everything, from the boardroom to the extravagant events he hosted at his mansion. She'd learned quickly that no one, not even the most influential players in the room, questioned his decisions. And those who did, well, they didn't stay around long, but it wasn't just business that had her tangled in his world. No, there was a pull between them, something she couldn't explain. It wasn't just his power. It wasn't just his wealth. It was the way he looked at her. Cold, intense, calculating. But every once in a while, there was a flicker of something else, something warmer, a curiosity, maybe even something deeper. She wasn't sure. But one thing she knew for certain, Khalid didn't do anything without purpose, and everything he did had a price. Come here! The words cut through the air like a knife, pulling Emma from her thoughts. Khalid stood in the middle of his office, his gaze locked onto hers. It wasn't an order, it was a command, as if she had no choice but to follow. And for some reason, her feet moved before her brain could even catch up. When she reached him, he didn't say a word. Instead, he reached out and lightly brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered longer than necessary, his touch just shy of intimate, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. What was this? Was he testing her? Or was this something else entirely? You're not like the others. His voice was low, a touch of something almost dangerous. She raised an eyebrow, fighting the heat that was threatening to crawl up her neck. And what exactly does that mean? He smirked, stepping even closer, his body now a mere inch from hers. You're not afraid of me. She swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. Should I be? His eyes darkened for a moment, and for the first time she saw a flash of vulnerability, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by that same unreadable gaze. You should be. And just like that, the playful edge in his voice disappeared, replaced with something sharp. Something that made Emma realize that, no matter how much she might deny it, she was already in deeper than she ever intended. But as he looked at her, his gaze never wavering, part of her wanted to find out just how far this dangerous dance would go. Because every part of her screamed that, no matter how it ended, she wasn't walking away unscathed. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to. It was late one evening when Emma found herself standing in the grand hallway of Khalid's mansion, staring at the door that led to the study. The door she knew was where he spent hours, locked away, with only his thoughts and the weight of the world to keep him company. She had never dared to go in there before. She had always respected the boundaries he had set, the rules that kept her in her place. But tonight? Tonight, something felt different. Tonight, she felt a pull, an irresistible force that drew her to him, a need she couldn't explain. She didn't even knock. The door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open slowly, stepping inside. Khalid was there, just as she expected, sitting behind his massive desk, his eyes focused on the screen in front of him. The soft glow of the lamp cast shadows across his face, accentuating the sharp lines of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze. He looked up only when she entered, his brow slightly furrowed, his expression unreadable. "Emma," he said, his voice low, almost like a warning. She took a step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no turning back now. "I need to talk to you." Her voice was steady, but inside she was anything but calm. He didn't move, just studied her, like she was a puzzle he was still trying to solve. About what? About us, she said, the words leaving her mouth before she could stop them. There was a moment of silence between them, thick with tension, before Khalid stood from his chair, moving toward her with that confident, almost predatory grace that made her pulse quicken. "You've been thinking about this," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "About me. About what this is." He took another step, and now he was only inches away. His presence was overwhelming, filling the space between them, wrapping around her like a vice. "And you're asking yourself if you're ready for it, aren't you?" Her breath caught in her throat. "I don't know," she admitted, her gaze flickering to his lips, then back to his eyes. "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not." He smirked, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "You're scared." She shook her head, trying to mask the truth behind her words. "I'm not scared." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. She was terrified. Terrified of the pull he had on her, terrified of how easily he could control her with just a look, a touch. Terrified that she might want this, whatever this was, more than she cared to admit. Khalid reached out, gently cupping her chin with his fingers, tilting her face upward to meet his gaze. His touch was like fire, warm and searing, and Emma's heart raced as he slowly leaned in, his lips barely brushing against her ear as he whispered, "I think you're more than ready, Emma. You just don't know it yet." Her breath hitched, her body reacting to the heat between them. There was a moment of hesitation, just a brief fleeting second where she could still pull away, where she could still walk out that door and pretend this had never happened. But that moment passed in an instant. She wanted him. She wanted all of him. And when his lips found hers in a kiss that was both demanding and tender, Emma knew that whatever had started between them wasn't just about power or business or even survival. It was something deeper. Something that would change everything. And she wasn't sure she was ready to walk away from it. But she knew one thing for sure. There was no going back now. Every day, Emma found herself falling deeper into this strange, intoxicating world Khalid had built around her. It wasn't just the wealth or the glamour that pulled her in. It was him, his eyes, that unwavering gaze that seemed to see through her, to the very core of her, stripping away every wall she'd built over the years. She had to admit it to herself. She was in too deep. But even as she tried to fight it, she couldn't help but crave the touch of his fingers, the commanding presence he exuded. But there was a price to this. There was always a price. The higher she climbed in this world of his, the more she realized that she wasn't just playing a game. She was in it for real. And Khalid. He had a way of making her feel like nothing else mattered, until it did. When a major deal went south, when power players started eyeing her as if she were just another pawn in Khalid's game, the tension between them reached a boiling point. "You're mine now," Khalid told her one night, his voice colder than she had ever heard it before. "I'm not a possession, Khalid." Her words were sharp, defiant, until she saw the look in his eyes. It was a challenge. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "You're already in this, Emma, and there's no way out now." Just when Emma thought she could handle the storm that was Khalid's world, everything came crashing down. A betrayal, a silent, unexpected one, shattered the fragile trust they had built. And it wasn't from the outside. No, the betrayal came from within. Khalid's closest ally, someone she had trusted, turned out to have a much darker agenda. Khalid had warned her. He'd told her to trust no one. But trusting him? That had always felt safe. Until it didn't. Until that night when everything changed. When the secrets started to unravel, and Emma realized just how deep Khalid's world went, and just how little she truly understood about the man she'd been letting into her life. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice breaking as the truth hit her. Khalid's face remained stoic, but his eyes, they were something else. A flicker of guilt, or maybe pain, passed through them, but only for a second. "I didn't lie, Emma. I protected you." But protection wasn't enough. Not anymore. Not when she needed the truth more than anything. It was in that moment, with her world shattered, that she understood the real cost of being with someone like Khalid. But as much as it hurt, as much as she felt betrayed, there was something else, something undeniable. The pull between them wasn't gone. It was still there, stronger than ever, pulling her toward him. And she couldn't resist it. The weeks after the betrayal were filled with tension, silence, and the unbearable weight of unspoken words. Emma didn't know who to trust anymore. She had seen the dark side of Khalid's world, the side that was ruthless, calculated, and willing to destroy anything or anyone that stood in his way. She didn't know if she could handle it, but every time she looked into his eyes, she felt it again. That undeniable connection, the fire between them. It was dangerous. It was intense, but it was real. Khalid didn't make promises. He never had. But he didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than anything. And when he came to her one night, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him, she realized he wasn't the only one who had changed. "I'm not the same person I was when we met," he confessed, his voice softer than she expected. "And neither are you." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of his words in her chest. She had been so focused on what she needed to survive that she hadn't realized what they had built together, what they were building now. But the decision wasn't simple. It never was. Love? Power? She could have both, or she could lose everything, because nothing was ever truly free in Khalid's world. Just when Emma thought she had it all figured out, life threw her a curveball. Khalid, with all his power, all his influence, all his wealth, wasn't immune to the twists of fate. There was something darker beneath the surface, something Emma had never anticipated, a family secret that changed everything. Khalid wasn't just the man she had fallen for. He was something else entirely, a part of a legacy she had never known existed. When Khalid shared the truth with her about his family, his history, and the one thing that had been keeping him up at night, she realized just how much was on the line. And in that moment, when everything seemed to fall apart around them, Emma made the decision that would define the rest of her life. "I'll be by your side," she said, her voice steady, her resolve clear. "No matter what happens, we face this together." Khalid stared at her, the hardness in his eyes softening, just for a moment. It was a look she had never seen before, vulnerable, raw, and full of hope. And as they stood together, ready to face whatever was coming next, Emma realized that sometimes the most unexpected twists led to the most incredible beginnings. And for once in her life, she was ready to embrace the unknown, whatever it may bring. Because with Khalid by her side, she knew nothing was impossible.